17th.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Good evening and welcome to the Social Newsroom this Monday, 17th November 2025. Carrying the conversation this evening, my name is Wendy Lois. Now, tonight we want to dive into a conversation that is fundamental to our democracy today, and this is the Public Participation Bill 2025. We've had a bill in 2024, and today we are having conversations online and on the ground. Is it a true reflection of what is happening on the ground, or is it just a participation? Because the Public Participation Bill is a show of the heartbeat of how people can influence democracy, especially in Kenya. But over the years, we've seen a trend where laws are being passed, but they do not actually represent what is being shown by the people on the ground. And tonight we ask the big questions. Are our leaders listening? Is participation real or performative? And to help me do this conversation tonight, to demystify some of the myths and what is just true to be brought to the table, is James Wanjeri, an advocate of the High Court. James, it's an honor to have you this evening. Karibu sana.
Thank you. Thank you. I am James Wanjeri, as you said, advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Quite involved in a lot of the governance matters, the intersection between law and governance, human rights and all that. Yeah, and I look forward to having this conversation.
Fantastic. I like that even before the cameras started rolling, we were having this conversation. And James, the reality is you're having conversations around the Public Participation Bill 2025. And this is a bill that has come and is seeking to bring structure around public participation. Is it a true reflection of what real participation will be, or is it just another performative act by our leaders?
Well, of course, you know, public participation is provided for, it's one of our core values under Article 10 of the Constitution. And it's always good to start from the why. Why public participation? I remember one of the complaints you used to hear about the former President Moi is that one day you just wake up to find tractors outside. They've come to, you know, it's the road. We've decided it's the road. And you're wondering who was informed, who was consulted, no one was told about this, no notice, nothing.
Yeah.
And that was coming from the idea, you know, for a long time that it's government that decides when you're going to get development, okay? Now this has a lot of challenges because, for instance, you could be bringing a form of development that people are actually not looking for. And so public participation is grounded in the idea that the people know what they want. And so you should start with the people. Ask the people what they want. Tell them this is what I'd like to bring. And hear from them whether that is what they'd like or they'd like something different. And so that idea is strange to our governance structure because, remember, for a long time, and especially because we've had a centralized form of government for a very long time. It was always about how close to the center are you. And the farther away you are from the center, it means the less development you get. It means the less attention you get. And for a lot of people, they would always feel like they're within the borders, but they're really not Kenyans. They wouldn't count themselves as Kenyans. Yeah. So the idea then is that to actualize public participation as it's set out in the Constitution, then of course you need to have a bill. And as you said, we had a 2024 bill, and now we have a 2025 bill. And I know as we have this conversation, we're going to be talking about how the two compare. I have a lot of problems with the Public Participation Bill 2025, the structure it has, and how it provides for proper public participation, yeah. But I guess we're going to be talking about that as we move.
Yeah, and that's a great place to actually just start the conversation around the bill, the 2025 bill, because in 2024 we had things like the Office of the Registrar, where this office was given the mandate to now give the information to people, and we would hold that office accountable. But in 2025 we are seeing responsible authority for participation, and we've seen different categories and different offices being given the different mandates. If you can just touch on that and highlight some of the differences between 24 and 25.
Yeah. So how our constitution is framed, the structure of our constitution is that the law, the constitution will say, okay, these are the laws, these are the rights, these are the things we want. But then Parliament was given a window within which now you have to actualize some of these things. And so, what has then happened is that in 2024, when the bill came, 2024's bill, one of the distinct differences with the 2025 bill is that in 2024, there was created a position known as the Office of the Registrar for Public Participation. This meant that public participation as a right and as a value under the Constitution was housed within this structure under the registrar. This registrar would then be the one to guide all other government agencies on how to conduct public participation. They would come up with guidelines. They'd be the ones responsible. They'd come up with timelines, you know, what amounts to proper public participation. How do we hear some of the challenges that people have with public participation? 2025, that has been scrapped. Now, what you have in 2025 is, as you said, you have the responsible authority, which means that in every, for instance, in the judiciary, there's a person who's considered the responsible authority for public participation, in which case for the judiciary is the chief registrar of the judiciary.
Yeah.
So you have an officer within all these government agencies who's tasked with the work of conducting and ensuring public participation is done.
Yeah.
I don't know why we've walked away from the chief registrar idea, because it would have, part of the challenge has been, ever since public participation started happening in Kenya, a lot of the challenge has been that you do not have two public participations that are being conducted in the same manner.
Yeah.
There are a lot of differences. There are some public participations where you'll go, one thing is said or one thing is done, then you go to another and it's a completely different thing. So it means that it's almost at the discretion of the person who's putting it together on how it's going to run. And that, in effect, what it does over time is that it waters down how this right was meant to be enjoyed by Kenyans. Yeah.
Yeah. And the most important thing that I've even seen conversations going online right now is Kenyans are saying the people who are now being given mandate in the different offices are the same people who've constantly been ignoring us. But now the law is demanding of them to listen to what the people are saying. From where you sit, how effective do you think this will be according to the bill in 2025?
Well, the way the 2025 bill has been set up, it's simply adding a further responsibility to officers who are already in existence.
That's true.
And it's important to actually note that when you look at 2024 bill, for instance, it had the registrar, and then the responsible authority would account to the registrar. Now you don't have the registrar, so you just have the responsible authority. So the challenge we see here is there's number one, you have that lack of, the lack of uniformity that one would expect, because that has been a really big problem. And so the current structure we're looking, I don't know how effective it will be, to be honest, just an answer in that question. I don't know how effective it will be, and it would have to be put to the test. But this is a perfect time, actually, for people to be able to say, this is how we'd like it done. Let me give you an example. Makueni County, when Kivutha Kibwana was governor, one of the best public participation models in the country, Kivutha would actually go to the ward and would sit with the people in the ward and tell them, I have, let's say, 100 million for your ward.
Yes.
How do you guys want to spend this money? And they would sit in those barazas and they would agree. As a ward, we've sat and agreed, this is how we want our money to be used. So that by the time now you're getting to the county at the very top, it's not a top-down approach. It's an approach where we've heard what you've said, we've taken it up, and then whatever information you've given us is now informing our approach or our policy at the very top. One of the best has been Makueni in that. I don't know whether they still do that. But for a lot of the other counties or a lot of the other agencies, you'll always hear things like, it's just, you're told the public participation is happening tomorrow. You know, or sometimes we ask, it's being done in a place that is not easily accessible by everyone. Sometimes there can be questions of, was there enough public participation? Fortunately for us, Kenyans have a lot of confidence in the courts. And so what has happened is a lot of people have gone to court to challenge some of the ways public participation is being done. And so, in essence, courts have had to be the ones now to say, this passed the public participation, this did not pass. Which means you'll go through that process, then go to court, and the court can, cancel everything, then you have to start again. So ideally, an act like this should cure such things, yeah.
Yeah. And before we get deeper into what ideally the Public Participation Bill 2025 is to us, perhaps there's a Kenyan out there who is now very new into the terminologies of public participation and what is this all about. How significant is public participation in the Kenyan Constitution, and how important is it for the people of Kenya? If you can just tell us, let's start from the beginning. What is this public participation? How important is it for our Constitution? But most importantly, how important is it for us as the citizens of the country?
Yeah. When you look at the Constitution, you start with Article 1, the very famous, the people shall. All sovereign power belongs to the people. And so the idea behind our Constitution is that the people are at the center, the people are at the core. Everything flows from the people, okay? And so if the people are at the center and they are the core, then it means that we have to find a way to listen to them, we have to find a way to hear their ideas, we have to find a way to engage them so that they can tell, the governed can tell those who govern, this is how we'd like to be governed, this is how we'd like things to be done. So you also have to realize that the Constitution in 2010 was being drafted by people who had come through a history. We had seen the history of our country. Yeah. We had seen how decisions would be made, no one is involved. We had seen how development funds will be distributed, and for a lot of people, they were not happy with how that was being done. So public participation is very, very key. And I think every citizen, every person should actually make sure that when they are given a chance to participate, to engage in public participation, they have to do it. Because it is one of what I'd call the civil duties that you have as a Kenyan citizen, as a person who's born here and who wants to take part in the development of your own country. And it's so important that we've had many instances where laws go to court and the court says you didn't have public participation. It is a core element of our governance structure, and therefore that law must be sent back to Parliament or it's declared void. So it is very, very important. And I think our democracy is what we call a participatory democracy, the type of democracy where the people are actually working hand in hand with those who are governing them. Yeah.
And I like how you've highlighted the importance of the people exercising their civic duties as part of engaging in public participation, and what our Constitution says the people shall. So ideally, this is an opportunity for us to be engaged and involved in actually policy making. And in the Bill 2025, there is an element of how then do these offices notify us if at all we are going to have any public participation. And we had TV, radio, we had websites, we had public meetings, and we'll have notice boards. Do you think this will apply to everyone, and is this inclusive enough considering people who come from all walks of life in our country?
Yeah. This is a question that courts have really had to answer. Let me give you an example. There was a time the county of Nairobi wanted to introduce a new payment system. And so public participation was required. And what they did is they put up an ad for the public participation on the Nairobi County website, okay? Then, of all the wards that Nairobi has, we have, I think we almost have 60 MCAs or something, or are they 80? There are many. They only had public participation in 4 wards out of all of Nairobi's wards. And so the question was taken to court. Does that amount to proper public participation? Number one, how the information was given. Did everyone have a chance to get this information? And Nairobi County said, yes, everyone did. But then the court asked them, okay, you had put it on the website, you have our website traffic, you have that data, show us the data so that we can see how many people exactly saw this. If you have a city that has 2 million people, if only 20,000 people saw a notice, did they really see it? So, of course, we have what is the traditional media. You know, radio is really big in Kenya. TV, of course, is there. You have the newspapers. And now we have social media, you know, that can be used for that. So the idea is, how do you increase the surface area to ensure that as many people as possible are aware of what is happening? And this has been one of the key challenges, that people are actually not aware of what's happening. They only come to discover later. There was a public participation, or there was a thing that was done, there was a meeting and people showed up for the meeting, and you're only discovering this after the fact. Okay, you'll only find public participation notices being issued or being very publicly available for those cases where it's a finance bill, you know. It's a big thing. So all of us, we have to, you know, we have to go there and turn up and give our thoughts on that. But I would say, even when it comes to citizen engagement, there's been very low citizen engagement on other things, you know, other laws, other projects that are being passed. You find you'll go for public participation in an area, you find there are only 10 people who decided to show up, you know, that day, even in spite of those instances where proper notice has been given and has been issued. So when you go to court, one of the things you have to show as a government agency or as an arm of government is that we actually, we know we had a dissemination of this to as many people as possible, and that explains who came in. And of course, the other thing you also have to show is who actually appeared. Yeah. You know, now there's a requirement. I see that the people who come, they have to sign an attendance, okay? Because that's evidence. Yeah. If someone goes to challenge that process in court, that is the evidence that would be presented. So there have been funny cases in court where, in some instances, you go and find the same ID has been issued, has been used by 10 people, or some people don't have signatures. And then, you know, also the nature of our governance is that people feel like you are elected to wake up one day and just make a public declaration, you know. One of the key public participation cases was in Kiambu, where the governor of Kiambu at the time just wakes up and says, we are no longer going to be issuing licenses for selling alcohol.
I remember those times.
And people are like, what? And so that starts. And you'll find, they'll say, okay, it's coming from a good place and everything, but then the law is the law.
And it has to be followed.
It has to be followed, yeah.
An important thing you highlight, when we usually have low engagement and turnout to such forums, do you think it is just a lack of interest from the people, or is it a deliberate withdrawal of information for the people so that they do not turn out? Because it looks like a double-edged sword. Yeah. Is it we, the people, who are not interested and out looking for the information, or is it that the stakeholders now withhold that information so that we do not participate?
Yeah, I think I would say at its core, you can't have that public participation without the people, right? And unfortunately, there are people within our societies who don't find these things to be, you know, important, or they do not think, or, you know, someone else can do it. And I think you see this behavior a lot, especially in schools, you know. When you go for Parents Teachers Day, you know, we used to have that thing, I remember when I was in primary school. Yeah. There'd be very few parents who'd turn up. And so when it comes to this sort of civic engagement, we still have a large part of our population that doesn't see the value in that. But not to lay blame on the people, because a lot of the blame actually has to go to stakeholders and government and the people who are putting this together. Short notices, for example. You hear next week on Thursday we'll be having public participation at 8 a.m. 8 a.m. normally is the time that someone would be going to work. Yeah. They have their own things they're doing. Have people been given enough time? The other thing is, what's the venue? I remember we had there were EPRA regulations that were coming in, and then people were told, I think people went to KICC or something. And so you have these regulations that are coming that are going to affect everyone. Then you decide to only set up one meeting at KICC. Yet the price of fuel affects the person living in Lodwar, it affects the person living in Garissa, it affects the person in Mombasa. So how have we decided that
this is the central place to have the conversation?
And then still, that April meeting was interesting because in that April meeting, the cabinet secretary at the time stood up and said, we are not going to have this tax. I have heard you people. I have heard your thoughts, and we are not going to have it. They still had it. They brought it back. So you wonder, what was the point of that process? So there's that. I feel there are obstacles that are placed in people's way. You know, in talking about notices, talking about time and all this. But on the other hand as well, I also feel that there's a deliberate attempt many times by government to have as few people as possible giving their thoughts and ideas. I think you heard the president the other day when he was talking about Adani, and he was saying the problem with Kenyans is that people think they know too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the attitude among our leadership, that you people think you know too much, and yet we know for you. Trust us, man.
Yeah,
Trust us. We know for you.
That is why we're in office.
Yeah, but that's not how the Constitution looks at governance. Yeah.
And that is not ideally how it should be. And it's good to highlight, we're not pointing fingers, but it is good to highlight that sometimes the obstacles that have been placed are so subtle that they are not very conspicuous for you to pinpoint and say this was a hindering barrier. But actually there are challenges that were put in place.
Yeah.
James, over the last couple of months, let me say from the Finance Bill 2024, we've seen a steady uprise in the curve of people engaging in civic education and being part of processes that are now leading to policy making and implementation. As somebody who sits in spaces where you engage in civic education, what are some of the numbers that you're looking at on the ground? How interested are people in the process? Because we've had people arguing that even for the Gen Z uprising, you know, it was more of a monumental kind of thing. This was a moment for us to be there. But the aftermath of participating now in the processes, people shy away from that. How are things looking on the ground for us?
Yes, I think a good starting point always is to remember that people can only rise to the level of information that they have. And that's why when it comes to civic engagement and when we talk about public participation, one of the key things that is considered is how much information was actually given to people. You'll notice that for a long time we've been having an information problem. And a lot of fake news has been coming, especially about things that are happening in Parliament. And I think at its core, it's about messaging, but it's also about people are not being given sufficient information. So it becomes very easy for that information to be distorted, right? And so Finance Bill 2024 is, I think it was a huge eye-opener for a lot of us who've been in this space of civic engagement, because one of the things it revealed to us was that perhaps the reason people do not take part in public participation is because they do not have the proper information. So one of the things you saw with 2024 Finance Bill is people began to create content even in their own mother tongue, just to explain to the person back in the village when those messages are being sent in WhatsApp groups. This is actually what is happening. And so there was that coordinated and not coordinated effort by young people to disseminate this information to as many people as possible, right? That is a good effort, but you can't tell me you're going to do that for every single bill, right? You can only get that level of support perhaps for some specific bills or some specific issues or projects. That level of engagement I don't think you're going to get for every. And perhaps one of the ways we raise that engagement is by ensuring that information goes out to the people. So for instance, Parliament has a bill tracker. By the time that bill is taken to Parliament, we should know from that point what's happening. This is it. This is what it looks like. This is a draft. You can have a look at it. It has gone to this stage. So unless you know where to find the tracker, you actually have no idea you know, what's happening in Parliament. So on the ground, I think the reality is that a lot of people have the desire to know what's happening, but there's very minimal information. And also I think that's by design, because the less information you have, the less ujuaji.
That you have, and the weaker you are.
Yeah.
You know?
You can't negotiate if you have no information.
Yeah. And I've been in quarters where conversations are being had that truly this information is being withheld from us deliberately so that we are not given the tools to make us strong. And I want to encourage our viewers, we have the Public Participation Bill 2025 out, and we would want to know, have you been able to interact with it? What is it that is in the bill that you'd like to be highlighted properly? And James, this brings me to a place where we've touched on, for these participations to be effective, feedback has to be given. And when I was going through the bill 2025, there's a place where they've said how people can then give feedback. So you've rallied for people to show up. People have shown up. You've given the information. There's been a participation, but people have the free will to give back feedback, right? And they've told us we can write letters or memos. We can speak in other forums. We can drop comments online, or we can attend workshops. That is how we'll be able to give back feedback. But early in the conversation, you mentioned a reality that has been there for most of us. You go to these barazas, you go to these forums, and it's like whatever feedback you give lands on deaf ears. So then with the Bill 2025, how do we encourage people then that this time around it shall be implemented, whatever it is that we say, because there's been that discrepancy?
Yeah, you know, I think in the lawmaking process, you'll have the bill which becomes an act, and then you'll have what are called guidelines. The guidelines now are the ones that, they're like bylaws, you know, they guide you on the nitty-gritties, you know, how do we do this, how do we make this effective? A few sad things have happened. For instance, if you look at the Supreme Court decision on the Finance Act, which many people found to be, you know, sort of disappointing decision, one of the questions was that should, for instance, Parliament tell you why they are not taking, if people go to public participation and say, we don't want this thing, and Parliament says, no, we are going to put it, should Parliament give you a reason for that? And the Supreme Court was of the view that no. All Parliament needs to show is we took into account. And so one of the questions perhaps we have to ask is, when you give your feedback for public participation, how is that feedback collated?
Yes.
How is that feedback considered? You'll remember when the President dissolved the cabinet and then had the new list, Parliament invited us to give our thoughts on that. And at that time, for those, you could only give written memoranda. There was no oral. This bill here provides oral as one of the channels that can be used. How many people are able to, I mean, we have quite an educated population, but still a huge part of our population is not able to write, okay? Those ones have been locked out of that process. And so we were told, Parliament came and said our servers have crashed. You remember?
Yep.
The email has crashed. Then they came back and said, okay, we've taken the thoughts, all the thoughts of Kenyans who've given their views on public participation, and they're going to be considered. We never received a report on that. There was no report on that, a report showing this is what the people said. The people had a problem with this for these reasons. It's not considered. And that's why for a lot of people now, it will almost feel like it's just a box ticking exercise. We just need to show we went, we listened to people, and we considered. Now the Supreme Court is even telling you, you don't really even need to explain to people why we went right when you told us to go left. So at the end of the day, really, how much power does our opinion have? How much does it hold? How much weight does it hold if you'll just listen to it and you can set it aside and you don't need to tell us why you've set it aside and you just proceed with what you wanted? I think you've seen, I was seeing the majority leader the other day saying, for 2025, we introduced the changes in different bills where people are saying no. And so what you've come to say is we found a way to be crafty.
Yeah.
So until people can actually see that the thoughts they have, the ideas they have, the opposition they have is actually being taken seriously, eventually what you're going to have is people just thinking, okay, this is just a box-ticking exercise. There's no reason to do it. And in essence, people just lose the psyche for it and no one turns up for it. Yeah.
And let me take you back to an element that you had highlighted and I think holds a lot of weight. which brings the element of accountability that in the Bill 2024, we had the Office of the Registrar of Public Participation. And I guess that was a central unit where you could hold people accountable. There was a place for you to go back and say, there was this public participation, however, the feedback we are getting, if at all there's any feedback that has been given back to us, is not in accordance to what we decided on the ground. For example, if more people voted towards North, and the lesser people voted towards right. In 2025, where we now have the office, the responsible authority for participation, how does this framework look like for us? Because then who do we hold accountable to give back feedback to the people?
Only what they're calling the the responsible authority, you know.
Yeah.
So, for instance, in Parliament, the responsible authority is the clerk of the National Assembly. So that becomes the person if you have any gripe with the process, that becomes the person you deal with. And you see, 2024 bill was trying to get rid of that, because how do you lead a process and then you are still the same person who we have to come to complain to, and you're still the same person who has to give us a resolution? Shouldn't we have someone we can actually complain about your conduct? How can we complain about your conduct to you? What are we supposed to do about it? For instance, if the clerk of the National Assembly carries out public participation in an improper way, and he's the person to actually complain to, how do they resolve? I think, you know, the more I think about it, one of the challenges that what I'd say, the ones who govern, one of the challenges they have is they don't realize that the Constitution of Kenya wants there to be radical transparency when it comes to governance.
Which is something we've really fought for and with and about for
we
the
are still
longest.
fighting. Yeah, and I don't know whether it's a question of will but I don't feel like they want that radical transparency. And one could say, okay, maybe it's because the project has to benefit a certain person. You get, for instance, you have a road project that is brought and the cost is inflated. It's almost 5 times. I think one of the issues with Adani, for instance, was that you have a report from auditors who are saying the way you're costing this, it's almost 5 times what it should ordinarily cost. And that happens a lot. With the SGR, we had the same issue, that the real cost is this, but the eventual cost comes to this, which means you are then creating pathways and loopholes for people to take advantage of a good thing to actually benefit themselves at the expense of everyone else. You know.
So we speak of Constitution in 2010. It's 15 years down the line. Has Kenya fully realized the importance and the fundamental part that public participation plays in our processes where we sit today, just before we go back to transparency and accountability? It's been 15 years.
Yeah.
I mean, have we seen any difference? Has there been any change? Have we realized the importance of this process for us? The
people have realized. Those who are governing are still catching up. I think when you speak to an average Kenyan, the man on the street, as we like to call them, they will actually tell you what public participation is about and why public participation is necessary and how it can be made better. But I often find that those who are in charge of these institutions, they are still catching up with everyone else. Because for a lot of them, the idea is almost like this is an inconvenience. Yeah, you know, why should we ask you about building a dam? What do you know about what do you know about building dams? You know, we have the experts, we have the money, we have everything. So if we tell you we're going to build the dam here, that's where we're going to build it. Yet the members of that community can come back to you and tell you, we think the dam should be here instead of here. Or we think the consideration should be this instead of the other. But because you've already come with a fixed mindset, then it becomes hard to even pay attention to the public participation. And so that idea that we're just coming for a rubber stamp here, you know, it means even that those who are governing, they don't actually put themselves in a position where you can actually be convinced to change your position and to move to the other side. And also remember, public participation is, can we come with an idea and say it should be done this way, but because of the information that is revealed at that public participation, we actually say, oh, okay, we were wrong. it could actually be done this other way. So there's that fear of engagement with people. And as long as fear exists and you can't engage freely, then people will always be trying to do underhand things and be trying to, put some cards under the table. But when it's open and we all know this is what we are trying to do, and we are both aligned in the fact that we want something that works for everyone, then we're able to actually come together and do it. Even I think the Bible speaks about a house being divided. If a house is divided, it cannot stand. And so it's about coming to a place of unity of purpose. I think that unity of purpose is with the people, because they passed this constitution. They know what they want. They know what they've asked for. So it's about, is the government catching up fast enough?
And when you speak, I think I am getting to a place of truth that is hard to talk about, because the centralization of information is mostly in towns. So we start with the capital, Nairobi, then we go to the other cities that we have, leave alone the people now deep in the villages and in the rural areas. And you realize we're living in tough economic times, and we've seen posts on social media saying poverty is the enemy, because sometimes even our folks who are in the villages, when they are called to such barazas, there's kitu kidogo, which has been put aside. So our folks go there and they're given like a packet of unga and sugar, and then they lose the meaning. It's dead on arrival, because then whatever they go there to do is sign the paper and not actually participate in the process. However, right now with the digital tools that we have and more young people getting engaged, we've seen a bit of window of light in how we can help pass on the information from where you sit. How can we help participate in ensuring this information goes as far wide as possible to ensure that now people are doing the correct thing and for the greater good of the country?
Yes. I think in an ideal world, the government should actually be the ones spearheading that.
Ideal world?
In an ideal world, because the government has the resources. It has unlimited resources in a sense. And so if the government wants the person in Lokicha to know something is being done, they can do it. Why are they not doing it? Perhaps it doesn't serve their interest for that. But you've also seen a lot of what I'd call, there's been a lot of comradeship, especially on the online spaces by Kenyans. Let me give you an example. There's a lady called Rose Njeri. And Rose Njeri, during the finance bill public participation, she comes up with a website in which you can go, look at, she actually puts this is the clause, this is what it says, this is what it's likely, this is what it means, and you give your thoughts, and then by one click, it allows you to send an email to the clerk of the National Assembly. She was arrested for that website.
That's
and she's actually in court now, being charged with a cybercrime. Then, a short while later, Parliament says we've now created a platform where you can come and do the exact same thing Rose Njeri
was doing,
and we are jailing her for.
Yeah.
So it, you know, when you look at such things, it's such a contradiction that you wonder, who's coming up with this? Who's coming up with this? And what's the end goal here? So for Kenyans have been very helpful towards each other in, I want you to understand what this thing is. I'm a huge user of X, and there are people on X who actually just dedicate their time to tell you, this is a bill that is coming and this is what's going to happen. How do we amplify those voices? How do we lend capacity to such individuals? We have people who have come through in forms of, just ringing the alarm on perhaps misappropriation or things like that happening. Like, for instance, we had the Adani deal and all that. How do we actually make that easier for people? For instance, today we talk about Goldenberg because of one gentleman called Munyake. And Munyake he saw the documents passing and was like, wait a minute.
There's something wrong here.
There's something wrong here. And this was before the constitution that we have now. Munyake died a poor, desperate man. Fired from his job for doing the right thing, shunned by society, hounded by government. And so when people look at that and they see the price, the heavy price that has to be paid for doing the right thing, then it pulls them back. When people look at Rose Njeri and the fact that this can happen to her, they pull back. And now, for instance, what happens is that the more the governments get paranoid, the more crazy their reactions become. You know, Tanzania is now a country, for instance, where someone danced a TikTok challenge and they're being charged with treason,
That's
you know.
Yeah.
That's the danger that happens. When governments get paranoid, then they come very hard on the people. And as you've seen, even with the terrorism charges we had for protesters, you've had people who've been in jail because the country is 50,000. The country is 100,000. And it has to take a concerted effort to actually shine a light on them. And there are many people who will fall through the cracks because it's all taking a lot of individual effort to highlight these stories. There's not that concerted idea. And I think if I could give any advice, for instance, for people in government, is to say, if the government is going to create a program or it's coming up with something, or if Parliament wants to pass a bill, find a way to communicate that to people in a language that they understand, you know. Why are you not coming to the radio stations to tell us what this is about? Why are you not coming to our TV to tell us what this is about? Why are you not going to the universities to have engagements with the students in those universities? Why are you not going to the churches? Because part of the challenge as well has been accessibility of some of these spaces where public participation is happening. And then you find that people are put in a room where you are not even feeling safe enough to actually express yourself fully. And if you look at this 2025 bill, one of the things it says is that the responsible authority will decide how to conduct the public participation. Yeah, so we can decide how many times you're going to touch this mic. We can decide if you're going to throw tear gas into this place. You know, that has happened a lot in public participation gatherings. Riot police come, tear gas, mkutano imeisha.
Kabisa. And James, this sounds, our conversation has truly highlighted that this could be more of an administrative cleanup. We saw our president come out and said, it was almost like he was saying, we've had you guys and therefore we've brought this bill and we want you guys to be part of it. But again, on the flip side of it, there are all these hindrances that could be there that will be barriers to the effectiveness of it. However, we've seen individuals who came out strongly, the likes of Morara Kebaso, and he started as an individual who was calling leaders into accountability and going to the deep parts and looking at projects that a lot of funds had been poured into that. And you've mentioned quite a couple of other individuals who now their ending was really sad. Are there stand-up provisions that we can have that will quote unquote bring sustainability for us to be able to push this agenda forward, that this is for the people, you know, and it should work for the people? Do we have provisions by law, or it's hard to talk about ethically, but do we have those provisions that we can say, now, James, moving forward as young people, this is what we could use or implement to bring sustainability for the agenda we want to push, even with such bills? Yeah.
Well, a lot of, you see, citizen engagement a lot of times is decentralized, right? And so you'll find that for a lot of people, the unity of purpose comes in, this is the outcome we want, but we don't have a unity of thought in how we are going to achieve that outcome. And that's now the danger when it's purely citizen-led processes, okay? And that's why governments exist. Because governments exist to give structure to things. For instance, we know if you want to be a member of parliament, you have to be voted for.
Yeah.
Okay? That's the law. That's the government to ensure that when you go to the ballot, you have a ballot paper, and you have a ballot box, and you vote, and when you leave, someone counts, and they get the numbers, and here is your MP. That is structure, okay? We don't see a lot of that when it comes to public participation. And I think, as I've always maintained, I think it's by design, because we still have people who are holding on to the old way of doing things. The old way where government was a mystery, you know, where information was not open to everyone. They've struggled even with the questions of access to information. For instance, you'll see that one of the things the bill talks about is information that cannot be provided.
I actually saw that, yes.
Yeah, and even in the Access Information Act, they've put there and said there's information we can't give you, and it's allowed. But it comes with a rider where the Access Information Act says, if that information is needed for the exercise of a right, then you have to provide that information. So governments essentially work by hiding. That's like the default government mode, hiding. You have the Constitution of Kenya, which comes to tell you, pull back the curtains, open the windows, let the light in and let the air in. That's very hard for a lot of people to do, because I think there are people who, their idea of power is that I am controlling information.
Yes.
I'm controlling the flow of that info. That's power for me. So if you tell them to actually open, they're like, then I become powerless.
And there's a catch there, James, and I want us to spend a second there, even as we wind up the conversation, that indeed there are such clauses that are put there. And, you know, if someone is not keen actually in even the Participation Bill 2025, you might actually just miss it, that there's actually the element of they can withhold that information from you. But again, you mentioned that if that information is needed, it should be provided.
Yes.
But the bearers of the information, it is almost like it is my left hand fighting my right hand, and yet I am the owner of both. But by law, because this is a space that you practice and you have expertise in, where do we draw proper lines to say now this information cannot be withheld and it needs to be provided, and it's actually a right that we need access to the information?
A lot of times that question can only be answered by judges. And that's why we have the judicial system that we have. And you see, one of the beauties of our constitution is that there's this idea of locus standi. Locus standi basically is the right to stand, okay? And so in the constitution we had before this, you couldn't go to court on a public interest issue unless it was affecting you personally, or unless you had a stake in it. So the 2010 constitution comes and says, as you sit here, you can decide to go to court because of a woman in Busia not having access to prenatal or postnatal care. And you are not from Busia, you've never maybe even stepped foot in Busia, but you can represent someone in Busia, and it's public interest. Why? Because there's a right that has been violated or is at risk of being violated, and therefore you want to ensure that safeguards are provided. So a lot of times, only the courts will have to step in and answer that question and say, should that information have been provided or not? Which then means that you extend that process, because, of course, courts have their own timelines. And so many times, by the time the court is now coming back to say this information should have been provided or this should have been done, a lot of time has passed, momentum has gone, we are now dealing with other new things. But, I mean, that's the beauty of democracy, right? That we have these checks and balances. And ideally, when Parliament works well, when Parliament works well, and one of the roles of Parliament, of course, you know, is to provide checks and balances. Parliament should actually be at the forefront of saying, no, this thing should not be done the way it's being done. But now what's happening is it almost looks like, it's like the laws are coming from State House, and Parliament is a laundromat, you know, and there's someone with a stamp there saying, yeah, we petition you.
And there's no way you can say, no, this one is not going to pass.
Yeah, and that's the huge disconnect now.
Yeah. There's another important element that this bill highlights, that number one, it has come to bring structure for participation and inclusion. And part of this inclusivity is the marginalized group. We have youth, we have women, we have people living with disabilities, and then we have people in the minorities. What is the sincerity and genuineness of this clause? Because how then do we truly include them? And I would bring you to a place of even accessibility of some of the places where these forums will be held. Is this an important element that the marginalized group should pick up and actually voice out and participate in?
No, of course. Our constitution also is a constitution that protects marginalized groups, and it names them. And it actually is not an exhaustive list, because it's the realization that perhaps there is a group we don't realize are marginalized, and that information will only come to us later. And so the net is so wide that it has to catch them. But let me give you an example. This bill is not available in Braille. How are the blind supposed to tell you what is in this bill?
That's true.
Clearly, that's a question of, access. You've talked about the venue where some of these conversations take place. I have always been of the view, actually, that public participation should be held in places like schools. Schools are inside the community. They're easily accessible. I have a school outside my house. I can easily walk there. You see, the way it's easy to vote is the same way it should be easy to give public participation and to access that information.
Yes.
Because think about it, your polling station is 5 minutes away.
It has been brought closer
Yeah.
to you and made as convenient as possible.
So why not public participation?
Yeah.
It just means then that someone thinks it's not as important as voting. So we have to actually look, for instance, you talk about persons with disabilities. You're talking about distance. How much effort, resources is needed to move this person from where they are to this public participation center, you know? You have communities that may not, you have nomadic and, pastoralist communities, okay? These are people that are always on the move. How are we catering to them? And can I shock you, one of the amendments to the election laws is to actually now have a mobile polling station. Because we have recognized we have communities that are always on the move.
On the move.
So let's also have a moving, but we've done nothing like that for public participation.
Yeah.
So once again, if it was as important as voting, they would do, yeah, it would have been done. So I don't think it's a question of inability, it's just a question of will. There's no will to do it. And I think it's, if you actually look at it, it's very sad because the best form of governance is a governance that is driven, it's powered by people. It's powered by people, it's powered by their ideas. And my experience when I look at Kenyans is that Kenyans are not sitting somewhere waiting for you to come and bring food on a plate for them. Kenyans want to be part, they want to be with you as you plant, they want to be with you as you harvest, they want to be with you as you lay it out in the sun to dry, they want to be with you in the kitchen, they want to be with you at the chopping board.
Yeah.
Kenyans actually want to be involved in every step of these things, so that by the time the meal is coming, it's something we've all done. But a lot of those in leadership, the idea is that I will bring you
Ready-made food.
on the table. And
because you know what is good for you.
because you're not in the kitchen, you don't even know how much it is. You could be thanking someone for giving you a plate, when in reality, if they were doing it rightly, should have eaten 10 plates.
That's true. And I like what you said. Sometimes it's not even the issue of, for example, funds, because we've seen misplaced priorities in projects, and if we just redirected such funds, and I know if they were deliberate enough, this should have been able to come across and meet so many people. As we wind up and getting your last sentiments, and again, I will bring it to a highlight that there's someone probably even listening to us today and have not accessed the public participation bill, or they're trying to get a grasp of it. How can we access it? You know, if someone has technological access, where do they get this bill? And then how do they now get to, because there were places that they highlighted, for example, they'll do TV and radio and adverts and social media, but then are there specific channels and places that we can go to intentionally look out for this information?
Well, thank God for the Constitution, because one of the things the Constitution has done is to ensure information is publicly available on publicly accessible platforms.
Yeah.
So one of those has been the Parliament website. So for instance, if you want to know what this bill says, all you need to go to Google and just say, public participation bill 2025. And the first hit you're going to get is actually the Parliament website. So that has been done by our Constitution and our laws to ensure that people have access to that information as much as possible. Governments will still try to throttle. You'll remember with SHA, when there was the whole debacle with SHA about a hospital is being declared as a level 4, it only has 2 rooms. What did they do? They shut down the website. So you couldn't get that information anyway. Yet it's actually a right to get that information. There was IEBC as well. People started raising questions about we can't access the site, we need some information. Everything was shut, and then you're told there's maintenance. That maintenance had not been communicated prior for people to know we've planned a maintenance for this period. So it almost feels like, oh, you guys have found out something. Let's come in and try to block it. Oh, you guys have made noise. Okay. Kwani hamjui jokes? You know.
We'll give you a total blackout.
You know. So
Yeah.
that's how it's going. But the beauty now is that because of the huge internet penetration we have in the country, it means if you have access to the internet, you can actually get a lot of this information. But also it's to say, I think a lot of the civic actors, they also have a part to play, I believe, in ensuring that this information is easily available. I remember when we had the Constitution, because when this Constitution was coming, I was at that time I was in campus, and I remember in the newspapers we had pullouts of the entire thing, the draft Constitution, which means that people actually read. Hata wale walisoma na baba walikuwa na chance ya kusoma. You know, the guys said Baba has read. Yeah. And if Baba says,
so it is.
If Baba says it is, you know. Yeah. But even they got a chance to have that, document in their hands. So it's then a question of, if we actually wanted to do this, we could. For instance, I mean, we have all these CDF offices. You have the MCA with an office. Why are those not being used as channels for distribution of information? Because, you see, part of the challenge is that if you leave distribution to particular people, and it's not a collective action, then fake news comes in, and stories are brought in, and then you discover, okay, the government comes to say, oh, people are being paid to push an agenda. The only way to beat propaganda is to provide accurate information. And if you're not going to provide accurate information, then propaganda will swallow you. Yeah. And we all have a duty to actually ensure that discourse is being driven by real information, true information, because there's no reason why, for instance, we should go to the streets because of fake news. If you're going to the streets, let it be the real thing that's, taking you there. And so government should actually open its eyes to see if they play their rightful role, then we'll have less and less of these altercations. And at the end of it also, it's the idea, I think one of the things I struggle a lot with leadership in this country is we are often looked at like we are children, It's like, you people, you don't understand these things.
Yeah.
It's like, and I usually look at that and I wonder, like, where is that coming from? Like, kubebo toto. Like, you're like, why? It's not necessary. We have people in this country have the mental capacity to take in all this information and to break it down. And where they need help, you can give them help and they can ask for that help. But you have to make that possible. Many times I almost feel like it's usually a racist and colonialist narrative, where it's like, the colonizer came and looked at you and I, and simply because of the color of our skin said, these ones are too dense to understand anything, so we're going to do everything for them. But no, that's what we were fighting against. So it's also really wrong that the same stereotype will be perpetuated by fellow black people, it's disempowering.
And it's sad that people still believe that if you want to hide information from an African man, put it in books. Yeah. And this particular bill is actually a 12-page bill. I believe they've tried to make it as simple as possible for people to understand. So part of our duty is to engage in it and see what our rights and our responsibilities are even in accordance to the bill. As I take your parting shot, because we've just touched, I think, the tip of the iceberg, whether this is real participation or it is a performance to just clean up the administrative block, I believe we as citizens also have a role and a hand to play in it, because the more of us who come out and rise and be part of the processes and actually highlight some of the issues that are there, more accountability shall be put to place. I will take your closing remarks on that, and then how do we move forward as we come to a close of the conversation this evening? Yeah,
as I said, Kenya is a participatory democracy, and a participatory democracy means that you and I have our role to play, and we can never shirk that responsibility, because no one else can do it. And so now that the bill is in that point where we can actually bring our views, make sure your views are heard. Make sure you send memoranda. Make sure you appear. Because this bill is in Parliament, there's going to be an opportunity to actually go to Parliament and make representations on this. What are the issues you find in this? What are the things you don't like? It's not enough to tweet about it. It's not enough to talk about it on WhatsApp. We actually have to do the hard work, because changing a society requires people to make tough decisions and to do the actual hard work. Nothing happens passively, you know. We won't just wake up one day and things work. So my appeal is that this is our country, this is our society, we know what we want, and if we want to get that outcome, then we have to participate. We have to take part in it. We have to play our role. Let it be that we played our role and the other side failed to play theirs. Then, you know, that's fair. At that point, we can actually come and say, because of this, then this is the path we are taking. But if we don't do it, if we don't do anything about it, if we just sit back, if we think there's no point in it, an idea also that is pushed a lot by those who are governing, because they don't want you to participate. But there's power in participation, because the constitution we have today, it was our, it's a thing, we've decided this is our inheritance, our collective inheritance for everyone. So you and I now have to do the hard work of making sure Article 10 is a reality, transparency is a reality, accountability is a reality. And you can't do that passively, unfortunately. That can only be done by people who are willing to step up. And my prayer and my hope is that we will not continue to see what has been perpetuated, where people who actually rise up, they become some of the most affected and some of the hardest hit. Because then it creates fear, and it makes people pull back. So for me, I would say we need to protect these loud voices in our society, and we need to ensure that any attempt to snuff out people who are stepping up and speaking, that is not tolerated.
Yeah. Thank you so much, James, for coming and sharing with us from our constitution to 2004 and now to 2024 and now 2025. And the reality is people will only rise up to their level of information. And if you contribute to the numbers of the nation, then the difference shall come in. The Public Participation Bill 2025 is out. We'd want to know, what are your thoughts? What have you interacted with? What sits right and what doesn't? And this is our collective responsibility for all of us, because you and I both have a role to play in it. Thank you for joining our conversation this evening. My name is Wendy Lois. For now, we will love and leave you. Kwaheri this Monday, 17th evening. Asanteni.
Are we off?